We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
In recent years, the circular economy has gained increasing traction in Europe. The advent of the EU Circular Economy Package, the unveiling of various national level roadmaps in countries like France and Italy, the Netherlands and Finland. There's no question that the idea is taking off in that region. But what does this idea look like in different contexts, other parts of the world? Well, my two guests today have first-hand experience of working with the idea of the circular economy in Latin America. And they're going to share some of the lessons that they've learned over these last few years with us today. My name is Seb, I'm part of the MacArthur Foundation team, and I'll be your host for this session. And you're at the DIF, the Foundation's interactive online event series that looks at the circular economy and related topics. And we want to hear from you. We want you to submit your questions, your comments. We want you to join this conversation. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can do that by submitting questions and comments in the box alongside the stream window on the thinkdiff.co page. You can do that on the YouTube stream. If you're watching directly on YouTube already, there's a comment section on the right-hand side. And you can do it by tweeting us using hashtag ThinkDiff. And so, as I said, I'm joined today by two people who have been working with the Circle. I'm joined by Manuel, who heads up UNIDO, which is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in a number of Latin American countries, including Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina and Chile. And I'm joined by Paula, who leads the circular economy strategy for the National Development Agency in Uruguay. So welcome, Manuel, welcome, Paula. Manuel, I want to start with you because a lot of our audience won't be aware of this. What's the context of the circular economy in Latin America now? How pervasive is the idea?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation first. Well, three things come to mind. The first one has to do with climate change. I mean, there is a whole discourse about how this region is not contributing that much to climate change, but will be affected by climate change ultimately. This will be the focus of the COP25 in Chile. Therefore, the issue of climate change is picking up very strongly in the region. And we actually see the circular economy as an approach that can support the combat of climate change. The second aspect that comes to mind as well is we're dealing with a resource-rich region. A region that basically wants to be more efficient in terms of managing resources, and certainly the circular economy provides fantastic framework by which countries can actually generate income out of the resources that they have in a more efficient manner. And the last point is possibly to UNIDO, one of the most important ones, which is what are the next sources of income for the region in the forthcoming years? I mean, normally we're dealing with countries that have been dependent on exporting primary goods and focusing very much on extracting industries. And normally the recipe has been for these countries to actually move away from these sectors towards manufacturing, and within manufacturing, these technology-intensive sectors. Now, with the circular economy, the whole thing changes now dramatically, because what we actually see is the potential of adding value in existing industries where countries have comparative advantage, be it, for instance, agriculture or mining. And this changes radically the way we understand the industrialization process of countries. So it's not so much about changing and moving away from sectors where the country has a comparative advantage, but it's really building the capabilities in existing sectors through circular economy, and of course by the advent of Industry 4.0. These are the two mega trends that we see, and they are related by all means, and these are the two mega trends that we believe will play a major role in Latin America's future development. Now, this has led to a few initiatives in the region. One of them is the production of circular economy roadmaps, very much like in Europe. These roadmaps are in a very incipient state, But what is important is that countries are and policymakers are actually engaging with the private sector to develop these roadmaps. This is happening in Chile, it's happening here in Uruguay, it's happening in Colombia as well, some other countries in the region. This is being developed together with a new body of norms and regulations, very much the sort of measures that the European Union has put forward in the closing the loop package in 2015. The countries are moving towards that. At the same time, we have programs in which we're actually testing the validity of circular business models. The circular economy is not a panacea, and we've realized that there are many obstacles for it as well. And this is something that we want to talk about. And what we've also seen is the private sector getting engaged. I think the private sector here feels that if the circular economy is such an important thing, there should be some income that they can actually generate. So this idea of bringing together a business activity with an environmental focus is something that is attracting the private sector. So this is the context in which we are in Latin America.
So yes, I mean, with those three things in mind, you mentioned the fact that it's in some ways a response to climate change, that there's a resource opportunity, there's also a sort of development or growth opportunity, or a new kind of growth opportunity. Paola, your role specifically, you've worked on something, I believe it's called the Circular Economy Opportunities Programme. I guess that's the English translation, in Uruguay, which is one of the national level initiatives that I guess Manuel was alluding to. What is that, and what does it do?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. We are very pleased to be able to share the work that we are doing from the agency regarding promoting the circular economy in Uruguay. So we come up with this program that it's called Circular Opportunities. And what we're trying to do with this program is actually trying to engage the private sector in this process of transitioning toward the circular economy. And the program is based on three main components. And the first one is understanding that we need to generate knowledge and put that knowledge in service of the private sector. I mean, we need to engage the private sector by showing successful experiences and showing mainly what opportunities are related, what opportunities they can actually take advantage of regarding making their business model more circular. And the thing is, it's we can show them a lot of successful experiences, but we also need to make this experience for them more profitable, because at first there are some risk involved here. I mean, there are a lot of innovation, there are a lot of new things that for firms and for entrepreneurs, sometimes it's difficult to take the risk that involves trying to a new way of doing their business. They are very used to do it some way that it worked for them. So how do we support them to share that risk? So we are trying to address the funding gap that represent change in the model towards a more circular business model in different activities and in different sectors. So we have these two components. On one side, generating knowledge and trying to help them identify opportunities and trying to make they identify and actually size these opportunities, and on the other hand, trying to provide financial support for them to implement circular models and making their own models, business model, more circular, related new firms, and also in traditional firms that have been working for a long time but need to start thinking in a circular way so they can change some parts of their business model. So that's the focus of the program.
So we've got the knowledge sharing, we've got the funding. I with the finance side of that equation, I mean, I'm not a finance expert, self-confessed, not even my own finances actually, but one thing I do know is that finance is normally dependent on historical data, evidence that this has worked in the past, and therefore you can make investment decisions based on that. So I guess, Paula, a question for you is, in some way you or your organisation must have been personally convinced by the circular economy as an idea to actually be willing to bridge that funding gap. What about it compelled either yourself or your organisation to make that sort of jump, as it were?
Well, first of all, we are a national development agency, so our core is to promote development, and so we need to understand that being a small country, we only can think of a sustainable development based on the efficient use of our natural resources. We are an economy based on agricultural and agricultural industry. So we need to start thinking in a more sustainable way of using our resources in order to produce, in order to generate economic growth, in order to generate development. So this is out of the question. We need to think of how we actually attain a path of sustainable development. And then circular economy, it's like a great answer to that, because on one hand, it's based on the efficiency of the use of resources, and on the other hand, it also has the profitability point, a part of the equation. So this is the way that we understand we can convince the private sector of getting along with this transition. I mean, we are not asking to make an effort of being environmentally friendly based on their own effort. We are trying to show them that you can be profitable, but also in a sustainable way. You can make your business and growth and generate employment, but also trying to be more efficient in the use of natural resources, in the generation of waste, and in the context of circular economy. These both parts actually blend together in a perfect mix. So
it sounds like
it's pretty
in some
simple
ways,
to get convinced.
So it sounds like in some ways it has this kind of inspirational solutions framework to it. It has, it's not just identifying some of the challenges and problems that which Manuel alluded to in his first response. And obviously for business, the bottom line is it needs to work. Like they need to be able to make money or profit out of it and be able to continue running his business. Manuel, in your role, what's your role in relation to circular economy? Are you working with some of these national roadmaps, for example, or what's your specific remit in that area?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, we're in fact partner of ANDE in this program, and I mean, I have to say that there are a lot of lessons learned. Especially, as I said earlier, I mean, we're trying to pilot test whether circularity makes for a good business case. It's not always the case. That's why, we're trying to not only support the businesses, but also understand what is the policy framework under which these businesses can actually flourish. So we've got a direct partnership with ANDE in this initiative. And we've got some other programs running. We have a program in Uruguay called BioValor, where we're actually pilot testing circular economy projects, more on the biological side of the.
Can you give us an example, one of those projects, just to bring it to life?
Yeah,
for us a
well,
little
basically
bit.
dealing with bioenergy or compost. So we're actually dealing with the bio side of the circular economy chart. We're finding lots of challenges in terms of making this business cases profitable. I mean, we've come to realize that without having the games of the rules of the game clearly spelled out, it's very difficult for firms to actually accomplish full circularity and profitability. So that's why we also have a role in terms of changing policy and putting forward norms and regulations that can actually impact the business community. At the same time, we have a role in supporting governments developing roadmaps. This is, as I said, very new to these countries. They're very much basing their experiences on what is being done in Europe. And we're trying to actually look at what it means to write a roadmap, what sort of matrix we should be putting forward, how do we involve the private sector. So it's all pretty new to them. And finally, we have a role of spreading knowledge and experiences in the region. We actually held a major circular economy forum in Montevideo and in Chile the year after, where we basically put forward all these ideas that are coming up from Europe and the US and bring them to Latin America so that the business community can learn about this, the policymakers can learn about it, and also the academic world. I mean, I think something that is very important to us is the fact that, we still believe that the circular economy is the panacea, but it's not. So we need more research being done on what works and what does not work. So getting the academia involved in this is also an important role that we
I want to ask you at some stage more of a question about the panacea point and what maybe what's missing from the equation in a moment. But I wanted just to reflect a little bit on what you were saying there about the rules of the game, which is really interesting. It's obviously a challenge for many businesses to operate in today's economy in a circular fashion when everything has been optimized for take, make, waste. What does that work involve you doing? Is that convincing policymakers of making particular shifts, and if so, what are those shifts, or how hard is it to convince policymakers in Latin America to do something like that?
Yeah, well, it really has to do with legislation. When I talk about the rules of the game, I really mean the regulatory framework that countries need to put forward to make all these business models conducive. Yeah. So, for instance, extended producer responsibility. Without having one, it is impossible to actually push businesses to actually take care of their own waste. If you don't have a waste management law, exactly the same. So there are fundamental laws and regulations that need to be in place so that to create the incentives and the disincentives to move in the right direction. I think what we've come to realize is that, by putting all these regulations, the business community actually feels that we're taxing them. It's like an environmental tax to move toward the circular economy. And in some instances, you would actually say, yes, well, there's some disincentives through taxing, but at the same time, you have to give the carrot side. It's not just the stick, but the carrot side. And the carrot is the incentives that you have by producing and implementing, for instance, an eco-RRD design scheme by which firms can actually get part of the resources if they get engaged in innovative and sustainable R&D activities. So there has to be at the same time incentives and disincentives to accomplish this. So I think there's a major role by the public sector, by the government, and that's what I mean when I mention that the rules of the game needs to be very clearly spelled out to accompany that process.
I would like to add something to Manuel, what Manuel just said, because with this kind of project that we are supporting, we are generating a lot of information that is actually related to our own reality. I mean, this is our experiences in our country with our own productive systems, and this gives a lot of information for policymakers to actually analyze and set this regulatory framework right or adequate for what we need. So it's okay to look abroad and see what great experiences are happening all around the world, and this is an inspiration for us to work. But we also need like our own successful experiences to show what can be done and what policy framework do we need to actually push the circular economy even further.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Paola, like when I was listening to Manuel talk about sort of incentives the incentives, one of the incentives for a business to move towards circular economy would seemingly be the sort of inspiration of the solution, which I guess is a big part of your program, in that it's one part, here's some funding to help you get this off the ground. One part is also knowledge and skills. How challenging has it been, or is it, to raise awareness and get the message out there about this sort of paradigm shift, if you like, in a place like Uruguay, in a business place like Uruguay?
Well, of course, it's very challenging because we're trying to change the way that firms and producers think of their own business model. But actually, we have a great reception of all these ideas that we're trying to promote. We start like doing these events where we invite people from academia, from the region, from other countries, our own startups, entrepreneurs, and get all together to share the experience. And this has been really populous events. We have a lot of people attending and getting interested in this subject. So of course we're just at the beginning and we need to keep pushing, but we are in a good role here because the subject is on the table and people are start to thinking and understanding that it's actually needed a change in the way we think business for the next years. If we want to survive as a firm, you need to start thinking in the risk that involves staying in a linear model. So we are on a good way there.
If I may add, Seb, I think one of the challenges is that how do we make circularity works when the business model has been designed to be linear? And what we've come to realize is that it's not always working properly. So when we try to support businesses that have been in place for many years, trying to find a way to make them circular sometimes is really hard. Not only because the entrepreneur may not feel comfortable with the concept, but primarily because it's just very, very difficult to make things work if the business model has not been designed in the proper way. So that is one of the that's one of the reasons why we believe circular economy fits extremely nicely into the concept of green entrepreneurship. I mean, we're looking into young entrepreneurs that have all these new concepts into their DNA. I mean, issues like technology, Industry 4.0, climate change, is all part of their own way of thinking, and they are trying to actually apply this to their own business idea. So what is really interesting is that we actually get to see that circular economy works very nicely when we actually have young entrepreneurs adopting the idea and starting right from the beginning, from the design phase.
And I think that's what's interesting about what you're saying about working with younger entrepreneurs is that they're starting from, they've got a startup, so it's easy, almost not easy, but it's easier in some ways when applying the circular economy concept to start something small. With the larger businesses, the circular economy is not necessarily a simple idea to implement. It's more than just doing recycling, for example, of your goods. So I guess that's a challenge. What I want to come back to in a moment is some of the differences between circular economy in Latin America and Europe, and some of the lessons that you guys have learned from the work you've been doing, as well as talking about the relationship between the fourth industrial revolution and circular economy, which you've already alluded to a bit, Manuel. But first, I will hand over to my colleague Laura Franco, who's going to tell us a little bit about what else is going on over the next 3 days of DIF activity.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining this brilliant session with our guests Manuel Albaladejo and Paula Cobas. I would like to take just a minute to talk about upcoming sessions at the September 2019 DIF. Starting with a bang tomorrow at 10 a.m. BST, we are reflecting on how to convince your organization to apply the circular economy. Whether you come from the private or the public sector, this session is for you. Following at 11:30 a.m. BST, we will explore how the fashion industry is being redesigned, with a special focus on jeans. We hope to see you there, and don't forget to use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter to comment and ask questions. You can catch up on anything you missed and find the full schedule at thinkdiff.co or on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's YouTube channel.
Thank you very much, Laura, and do make sure that you visit thinkdiff.co and explore the full schedule. We've got 7 more sessions on the schedule tomorrow. Everything's available for catch up, so and you can find that on our YouTube channel as well. But back to Manuel and Paula. We've had a question in from the audience, from Twitter, from Helen. She's asked a question. I think perhaps it's you might be best placed to answer this, Paula, which is, sorry if you've already mentioned some of them, but what are the main sectors in Uruguay that you're working with or that could benefit most from the circular economy transition? What businesses are you working with, I guess, as well?
Well, we have a very broad approach to the topic, but we first focus on a few sectors that we understood. They have the more advantages to actually make circular models in a quick way. So we have these opportunities to show our own successful cases. We start working with, for example, everything related to sustainable agriculture and using waste from agriculture production in generating energy and generating other materials related to food, for example. With food waste, as I said, we are an economy based on an agricultural resource and activities. So we have a lot of production of food, and this, of course, leads to a lot of food waste in the process of production of this food. And we work there. We work with the wine industry. We have some very interesting cases in construction. So these are the main focus the main sectors that we focus at first, but we understand that this is part of what we need to do is understanding our own productive system and where are our advantages, and then try to put our main effort there and not try to replicate the solutions or the successful cases in other countries that actually have different advantages or different resource availability. And this is part of what we are trying to promote here.
I was going to ask a question, Manuel, a little bit about some of the differences between the applications of circular economy in Europe and Latin America. But actually, as Paula was answering that question, I kind of thought what the interesting question for you might be, how different are the applications between the Latin American countries that you actually work with or your role covers? I mean, are you still seeing similar initiatives that work in Uruguay working in Paraguay, for example, or actually is the context quite radically different?
Well, I think the production structure is pretty similar in the 4 countries that I'm covering. I think eventually there might be a difference in terms of how the government is approaching the circular economy. For instance, you've got the case of Chile, where the government right away sets up a circular economy unit at the Ministry of Environment and started, a very top-down approach to circular economy. Uruguay, I think, is pretty different. It's more pilot testing from the different government agencies and trying to convince policymakers at a higher level that the circular economy actually works. So, as I said, it's so incipient in the region that it's really hard to see differences now in terms of how the private sector is dealing with circular economy. What we actually see is governments taking different paths towards that roadmap. So you've got the top-down case of Chile, which will be showcased, by the way, at the COP25, and the Uruguayan case, which is we start from the bottom and by really showcasing that circular economy can actually make a difference for business, then we try to permeate all this at the highest policy level.
It seems like both those approaches can work. Is that your sort of bottom line to it? It's not. There's no prescription about how you do it in a country.
No, I think they can both work. We'll have to see in a few years. I think the common ground with all these countries is the fact that you don't have a supra sort of country body like the EU that is sort of guiding the whole process. I think that makes a huge difference. I think one of the things that we've realized is that when you're part of the EU, all these things are being discussed at a higher level, and then the normative aspects in each country need to adapt to the EU norms. This is not happening here. So the countries are very much on their own to actually explore, find out, what works, what does not work, what sort of policies may be applicable to the reality of these countries. So I think one of the lessons that we actually get to see is that when you have a body like the EU guiding the process, the member states can actually accommodate pretty quickly by adopting these principles, these targets, and then adapting the normative towards those goals. It's not the case here. The countries have to, swim on their own and find out what fits best.
The dynamic there, something that just struck me as interesting, that how we talked a lot about how important collaboration is between policy, finance, businesses. In fact, in many ways, you both said that, that a business can't do this on their own with the rules of the game have changed. How much are those, thinking about the difference between Latin America and the European context, for example, how much of those are nation specific? Like, how valuable is collaboration regionally in enabling the circular economy? Is that a factor, or is it actually really possible for a country like Uruguay to push forward with a circular economy agenda, regardless of whether Argentina or Chile or any other country is doing similar work?
Well, I think all these initiatives spread out pretty quickly. Once a country goes for it, then other countries can actually imitate and copy and feel comfortable with adopting the same kind of principles. We do have, in fact, a few initiatives where we're trying to link up the different roadmaps in countries and trying to learn from each other. In fact, in Chile, Corfo launched a very similar program to Andes program. So, and there are lessons being learned, and we're hoping that in COP25 we'll put the two teams to work together and understand, what worked, what didn't work, what lessons are learned. So I think there are prospects for South-South cooperation in terms of circular economy. But I think at this stage, to be honest, I think it's more, trial and error and very much, trying to learn about what is happening in other parts of the world and seeing whether those policies are replicable here. I mean, I think even in Europe, we still need to see whether all these circular economy discourse keeps going for some time, and whether all the promises made that it will generate all these millions of jobs and all these income actually materializes in practice. So, we are dealing with countries that are pretty advanced in the developing world, and therefore, they're keeping very close to what's happening in richer countries. But very much they do have their own agendas and they go alone.
But something that I think it's important regarding this about collaboration, regional collaboration, I think is, although we don't have this supranational institution that actually helps to get this kind of agreement or collaboration among countries, we all understand that we need the other countries, but all economies in Latin America are small economies that depend on the trade and depend on the relationship with other countries. So we need to understand that this needs to be a collaborative approach from all the countries, and not just individual initiatives from different countries trying to complement by chance. We need to start working on that process. Yes. And of course, it's harder. It's a challenge because we don't have like an authority that actually tell us what to do, how to do it. So it's a process of negotiation and trying to build networks and trying to work together and find out how we can all together promote this circular economy approach from a Latin American perspective.
Sounds like in some ways as well, there's kind of a friendly competitiveness between countries in terms of like a sort of front-running agenda. And I do like your point, Manuel, that when we talk about the emergence of circular economy in Europe, we're not talking about a region or even individual countries that have done it. They're all at different parts of the journey, and actually most of them are at a stage of unveiling strategies and roadmaps as opposed to changing massive parts of their economy. Paolo, I wanted to ask you, especially since it seems that Chile are copying what you've done, what's next for the Circular Opportunities programme?
Okay, so we have been working in this program for the past 2 years. We have seen a very nice evolution of the kind of projects that we can support. Now we are moving towards supporting projects related to services needed to enhance the circular economy in the country. So we are thinking now that we need to scale this with generating funding from the financial sector. I mean, the whole purpose of this program is to give like the initial push, but now we need to make the financial sector understand that this kind of business models, this kind of projects can be financed through commercial banking credit. And we are starting to work on how can we assess this kind of projects from a financial point of view, and trying to work with the banks and the rest of the financial institutions to promote the generation of like green credit lines, and to develop this part of the equation that still haven't made much progress.
That sounds like an enormous challenge.
Yes, it is.
How far along are you in that process? Do you have optimism and confidence that you're going to be able to work with the financial sector in that way?
Well, yeah, I of course, I'm very confident that we are going to achieve some great results on this, but it's actually very hard so far. We start thinking of what the banks and the financial sector needs to understand these kind of projects. Once again, having this successful experience give us a lot of information in order to present that to the financial sector and show them that this is a business that can be profitable, and these are credit subjects for them. This is one part. The other part is working with small and medium firms that actually are more credit constrained, and we have to start to thinking of new financial instrument that actually provide support to these special firms that actually are more restricted in the way they access the traditional financial sector. We are starting working in cooperation. In this case, we are working in a cooperation with other countries in Latin America, because all of us are facing the same problem, and they need to involve the financial sector and the financial institutions in this path. So we are sharing practices and trying to work with the financial institutions that actually are the same, or pretty much the same, in the different countries in Latin America. So this is one case of where collaboration is actually working.
So I was going to say, it sounds like in many ways a key part of breaking that particular challenge is international collaboration across the region. Sorry, Manuel.
One comment here, Seb. I think what is important here is to understand that, if we approach the commercial banking for these sort of initiatives, the fact that the government is involved, that has a technical team that deals with all the proposals, both from the financial and the technical side, really minimizes the cost of the formal banking sector to finance these sort of initiatives, because the government is putting resources into it as well. So I think it really facilitates the process by which the commercial banking can step in. If you don't have that, you will need to convince them from scratch. But I think the fact that the government is pushing for it and is funding these initiatives, I think minimizes the risk for the banking sector to step in. And I think that's an important lesson as well. I mean, I think we approach the banking sector now in a much more confident manner, because we have the government backup and we've got resources to set up grants that can facilitate the collateral that sometimes is demanded by the formal banking system.
A final question for you, Manuel. You've said it a couple of times that the circular economy is not a panacea. You've also mentioned the sort of twin trends of the fourth industrial revolution and circular economy. I just wondered if you could sort of elaborate on that a little bit more. What is it about the circular economy that's missing from the circular economy, for example? Or what would you like to see developed to make it that sort of paradigm shift?
Right. Okay. Well, I think there are a few areas that need a lot of work on. I think one of them is the fact that, in businesses we actually believe that sometimes the entrepreneur that generates the waste needs to actually valorize the waste itself. So and I think in our own project we've had the experience of somehow pushing the entrepreneurs that generate the waste to actually generate the value out of it themselves. And I think that's a big mistake. I think one of the main lessons coming from the circular economy is the importance of industrial symbiosis, the fact that there should be a third party adding value to the waste being generated by other parties. So I think that's an important lesson coming up. So the issue of industrial symbiosis is something I feel very strong about. And yeah, that would be an important lesson to be learned. The other one that we've been struggling with is the notion of circular economy per se, and even today, most people would relate waste to energy and recycling as circular economy. If you look at the business perspective, that's what circular economy is all about. And we struggle big time to actually spread out the concept of the circular economy to go into, servitization, eco-design, remanufacturing, reusing, and so on and so forth. So I guess, we're making poor judgments in terms of promoting circular economy if we end up only talking about recycling and waste to energy and so on and so forth. So that a lot of work needs to be done, especially to the businesses that eventually apply for these funds to make sure that they understand that the circular economy is much more than that.
Well, Manuel, Paula, thank you so much for your time this afternoon for us, I guess this morning for you. What I'll take away from this conversation is really the importance of that nexus between policy, finance, business opportunity, and it's been a great insight into how that plays out in a different context, although in many ways the challenges are very similar. Thank you so much to the audience for your tuning into this session, for your questions, and we really hope to see you again. Right up after this session is a session called How to Link Up the Bioeconomy. We've got a couple of innovators who are going to talk about how you generate revenue streams where there were waste streams. And I also want to remind you, if you're a viewer and you've got an idea or you've got something you want to share, that for our November event, which takes place the week commencing the 11th of November, you can still apply to contribute to that. The applications are only open for a little bit over a week, I think, or not for much longer. But if you go to our website, thinkdiff.co/contribute, you can find out more information about how you could actually be appearing in our lineup and maybe even being interviewed by me. But until next time, look forward to seeing you there, and thank you so much for tuning in to The Diff.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.